Stick it.
Hello, welcome back to Stick It. I am your host, Moses Colity, and you are listening to Stick It with Mr. Mo. So, this is a loving continuation of Stick It, one of my favorite podcasts. Unfortunately, the previous podcaster, Mr. Biggs, is no longer currently interested in continuing Stick It with Mr. Biggs. But Stick It in general, I felt was a very important podcast. It was something that you could never see anywhere else on the internet, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. Stick It is all about glue, adhesive, caulking, paint, anything that sticks and unsticks, solvents, and other types of removal methods for different types of adhesives, thin sets, concrete, anything that can stick together, we are going to talk about here on Stick It.
Stick it.
So, since we are your number one source for all things sticky and unsticky, let's get this party started. So, this is an unscripted episode. It's going to give me an idea of roughly how I would like the flow to go. But I was thinking earlier today, how would I explain a caulking scenario? And I think I came up with a pretty good solution in my head. I'm going to talk to you right now and teach you one of the best ways to get started when it comes to your very first caulking experience. So, you've probably already tried caulking before in your past. Maybe you didn't like the results, maybe there was something about it that wasn't quite that smooth, beautiful finish that you really wanted when you first laid down the bead and tried smoothing it out with your hand, or your finger, I should say. Well, let's start right there with your fingers. I want you to make sure that you're protecting them properly with a rubber glove. I say rubber, but it could be vinyl, latex, or nitrile. Once you have your glove on and you have your selected tube of caulking, I want you to practice. Practice, practice, practice. That's the only way that you can really get better at caulking. Caulking is not just something that can be useful for simply mechanically sealing things up. It can also be an art. If you look inside people's kitchens, at the base of the transition between maybe a tile backsplash and the countertop, you'll notice that there's a bead of clear silicone, brown, beige, white, whatever. There's a choice there. You can smear it all over, or you can make it as uniform and beautiful as you possibly can. There are tools out there to help you achieve a more consistent and mechanical looking bead. I personally use one. It's called the Fugi 2 from Sweden. Excellent, excellent tool. I won't get into the details of that today because I believe that if you really want to make sure that you have your caulking down to an art before you get to the science of it, which is more like a Fugi, it's mechanical, it's more sciency, I guess. You would get the same result almost every single time. But what if you don't have a tooling kit of any kind? To get better, to get really better at caulking, you have to practice. So I'm going to give you a tip on how to get started with caulking so that you're a little bit better. Better today than you would be yesterday. And better, hopefully, by the end of this podcast. Okay, so how are we going to get started? You have a caulking gun? I assume you do. If you don't, just get a really cheap one. Really, honestly, don't get an expensive caulking gun for starters. There's no point. They may feel a little bit better in your hand, but we want to make sure this is something that you're really interested in doing. So you're looking between $5 and $15. To be perfectly honest, $15 may get you a very good caulking gun. But this is where the real test begins. Once you have it, I want you to get, again, a cheap type of caulking. Maybe some acrylic latex by Alex Plus or DAP. That's the brand name. You go into a hardware store and you get a DAP brand caulking that says Alex on Alex, and it's super inexpensive. You simply take a tube of that home and then you put it in your caulking gun and you squeeze out a bead. Squeeze it until you get used to the feeling of the tube and the pressure in your fingertips. There's all kinds of little muscle fibers that you can twitch to make sure that you run down a consistent bead. If you want a good practice, you could just get a piece of paper and try to lay out as smooth and as even of a bead on a piece of paper as you possibly can. You'll notice as you're squeezing it out that there might be a bubble, a pop, or a skip, or a smear, or something that just causes your bead to not look as nice as you really wanted it to. Those are the feelings that I want you to get used to over time as you're laying down beads on the actual substrates that you're going to be putting them on. Now, if you want to take this up a little bit further, what I recommend is that you get 2 scrap pieces of wood and sandwich them together with screws, and then I want you to fill in the gap between those 2 sandwiched boards. Yeah, just fill them in with all the caulking that you possibly can. And then smooth it out and see what the results, look at the reaction from that particular kind of caulking. Now, I asked you to get acrylic latex or a latex sealant or caulking in this particular case because it's really easy to work with and it doesn't cause too much pain and suffering when it's time to clean up. You're already wearing a glove, but here's a good opportunity for you to go to the sink and just wash your hands and see how easily all that stuff just kind of comes off. Isn't that great? It just washes right off. Whenever you get used to this system of laying down the bead, you can eventually upgrade your choice to silicone. But we're not there yet. Like I said, I just want you to get started. I want you to get used to the feeling of the tools in your hand. Practice every day. This is how I got really good at laying down beads. And my beads, I feel, even without a tool, can be very consistent and beautiful, and I have a lot of confidence in them, but that's because I have a lot of experience and practice. So, once you lay down the bead, okay, to recap, buy a cheap caulking gun, buy a cheap tube of caulking, and then I want you to just practice. Squeeze out the caulking as much as you possibly can. If you want to buy a second or third tube, God bless you. Keep at it. You're dedicated. Practice every single day, and you will be better at sticking it with Stick It.
Stick It.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Stick It with Mr. Mo. I am very grateful and super happy to be a part of this new process, and I look forward to serving you as a source of information for all of your caulking, adhesive, glues, sealants, paints, thin sets, concretes, whatever sticks. I would like to talk about it right here on Stick It with Mr. Mo.
Stick It.